Hello, listeners. This is Kat. Welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of All For You. This will be part 11, day 18. Hisashi didn't wake up until a full day had passed. He had been quite content to enjoy the feeling of being horizontal until he heard one of the nurses mention the date. He nearly broke the bed in his mad rush to check on Izuku, who thankfully was perfectly fine. No new diagnoses, no issues with his heart, nothing. He wasn't even stressed. Izuku had just been sleeping, like he normally was. Though he did seem to perk up once Hisashi whispered good morning. Izuku had stretched all his limbs. He ended up looking like a little starfish of a person for one precious moment. Oh, he wished he had thought to grab his phone for a picture, and then opened his eyes to look at him, shifting in place slightly. It was about as close as Izuku could get to a good morning. He did not tear up at such an obvious positive reaction to his voice, but it was a near thing. His heart was putty in Izuku's tiny, uncoordinated hands. He knew it should terrify him, how much power Izuku had over him, how much more power Izuku had gained over him in just a few short weeks, but he didn't care. He skipped breakfast, as usual. Sanaki-san may be able to get him to sleep, but he was not ready to leave the room of his own volition yet, and quickly set about getting ready for the day. He changed out of his sleep clothes, brushed his teeth, showered very quickly, and settled in the recliner to watch Izuku for the rest of the day. Izuku stared at him, a curious light in his eyes. Hisashi beamed. There was a knock at the door. Hisashi looked up from where he had been reading one of the free parenting magazines roaming around Tanima's pediatric units. He had been singing for Izuku again to make up for his silence while he was sleeping, but he was hardly a professional singer and could only go for so long. He was resting his voice for a bit while distracting himself as he waited for either news from the Bakugos or another demand from Nezu. "Hello?" Hisashi called cautiously, his voice somewhat hoarse. "Hi, Hisashi," came Masaru's voice. "Masaru?" Hisashi stood up, striding across the room to open the door. Masaru blinked at him, his hand still hanging in the air. "How are Mitsuki and Katsuki?" Masaru finally let his hand drop and looked up at him. "I'm sorry. We've kind of kept you in the dark, haven't we?" "Yes, a bit," Hisashi said, letting some of his anxiety and annoyance slip into his voice. Masaru laughed, sounding somewhat nervous. "Well," Masaru said as he rubbed the back of his neck, "I tried to stop by earlier, but you were finally sleeping, and I didn't have the heart to wake you up." Hisashi huffed. He should have. He wouldn't have minded, though if Masaru would have been able to rouse Hisashi at all, would remain unknown. But, Masaru grinned, looking up at him. "How would you like to come and see them for yourself?" Hisashi blinked stupidly at him. "What?" Hisashi asked. "I don't think I heard you right." "You did." "You do want to come and see Katsuki, right?" Masaru asked. Mitsuki had been very upfront about not trusting him anymore. "Does Mitsuki know you're inviting me to see Katsuki?" Hisashi asked. Masaru smiled softly. "She does. She said that so long as you don't plan on, and I quote, starting shit." "I'm not." "Then you can come," Masaru said cheerfully. Hisashi looked back at Izuku in his incubator. "I can watch over him while you go visit," Masaru said softly. "You don't have to go for long. We just want you to meet him, and maybe eat something." Hisashi sighed, looking back at Masaru. "I'll go. Just come with me for a moment," he said, walking back to the incubator where Izuku lay sleeping. Masaru gasped, his eyes sparkling. "He's gotten bigger." Hisashi huffed softly. "You think?" Masaru nodded excitedly. Hisashi shook his head, a fond smile on his face, before turning back to his son. "He's far more awake and active than he was the last time you watched him. Izuku's been allowed to use the pacifier now, but it tends to fall out of his mouth. You can put it back in, but you must wash your hands first. He seems to like music, such as humming or other lullabies, and he likes to hold on to fingers." "Hisashi?" "You can see if he will grab your finger, but again, you must wash your hands. He likes to grab onto other things, too. I've seen him grab the edges of a blanket, of his tubing, but I think he prefers fingers." "Hisashi?" "He likes being talked to. He likes being read to, but I think he prefers the music." "Hisashi!" A hand fell on his shoulder. Hisashi stiffened and looked down at Masaru. Masaru smiled in a way he was sure was supposed to be comforting. "Izuku will be fine. I'll be fine. Go," Masaru said. Hisashi took a deep breath and let his eyes drift to Izuku, who slept peacefully, his hands clenched and unclenched. "You'll call Anda if you need anything," Hisashi asked. In a heartbeat. Yes, good, all right then, Hisashi said, letting a hand rest against Izuku's incubator. I'll be back soon. Get some food if you can handle it, Masaru called after him. Hisashi nodded as he left. He forced himself to keep walking and not look back, because if he looked back he would never leave. The walk to the labor and delivery unit was short, and it didn't take long to find Mitsuki's room. He knocked before entering, listening for Mitsuki's call. About time, old man, Mitsuki said through the door. Hisashi snorted and looked in. Mitsuki was sitting up in her hospital bed, a swaddled bundle in her arms. The baby wore a hat like Izuku, but had no need for an incubator, or medications, or surgery, or any of the wires and tubes that kept his son alive. He was so much larger than Izuku. Jealousy raged to life under his breastbone, though he was careful to keep his expression steady and unchanging. This was what he had wanted for him and Inko. He'd wanted Inko's pregnancy to be to term. He'd wanted that chubby, healthy baby swaddled up in blankets. He'd wanted that honeymoon period in the hospital with his wonderful wife, Inko, and his happy little baby, Izuku. He didn't get that. It made him angry. It wasn't fair. Hisashi took a slow, deep breath and shoved the jealousy and the anger deep down. Inko wouldn't have wanted that. Inko had been so excited to be pregnant at the same time as Mitsuki, to meet Katsuki, to dote on him just as they would their own son. They would not disrespect her memory by letting his base emotions get the better of him. He needed the Bakugos by his side as well. And to be honest, he was truly glad on some level that he didn't have to live through another death in childbirth, even from a distance, so he could stand to be happy for them, and for little Katsuki. Hisashi forced his feet into motion, walking closer to Mitsuki and the bundle that had started to squirm in her arms. Hisashi made to lean over and look at Katsuki, but Mitsuki pulled him closer to her chest and out of sight. Mitsuki said, a teasing smile on her lips. Hisashi pouted. What's the point of telling me to come over here if you aren't even going to let me see him? Sit, Mitsuki said, looking pointedly at the chair next to her bed. Hisashi raised a brow but complied. The next thing he knew, Katsuki was being placed in his arms. Oh, Hisashi said dumbly, eyes going wide and body going stiff. What was she doing? He had no idea how to hold a baby. Here, put his head in the crook of your elbow. Yeah, there you go. And put your hand under his little butt, Mitsuki coached as Hisashi mutely tried to follow her instructions. Katsuki squirmed in his grip, head turning side to side and body wiggling. Katsuki blinked his eyes open, and Hisashi tightened his grip on the baby minutely. His eyes were the same baby blue as Izuku's. Of course they were. They were both babies. Who knew what color they would be when they grew up, for either of them? Katsuki's arms broke free of the swaddle, his hands rubbing at his face as he stared at Hisashi. He escaped, Hisashi said. That's fine. He's a wiggler, Mitsuki said, snorting. Hisashi wondered if Izuku would be a wiggler. Probably. He liked to wiggle even as he was now. You can talk to him, you know. Hello, Katsuki, Hisashi said softly, offering him his free hand's finger like he did with Izuku. Katsuki grabbed it with a small, eh. Hisashi shook his finger slightly, and Katsuki jerked his little arm up. You guys shaking hands on some big bad villain deal I need to know about, Mitsuki joked. Hisashi chuckled. Yes, he's just promised to be Izuku's best friend for life. Mitsuki let out a wet laugh. Inko would have loved that, she said, her voice thick. Hisashi smiled slightly, his eyes beginning to sting. He didn't look away from the baby in his arms. Katsuki pulled Hisashi's finger into his mouth and started to suckle on it. Hisashi stared. I think he's hungry. Ring, 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 ring. Hello, this is Inko Midoriya. I'm sorry I missed your call. Please leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Beep. Hello, love. I got to meet Katsuki today. I'm sorry that you never got to. I know that you'd been excited to meet him. A soft sigh. I will admit to being somewhat jealous, I suppose, of Mitsuki's smooth delivery and Katsuki's health. It is, well, frustrating is one way to put it. But there's little I can do about it. There's nothing I can do to bring you back, or make Izuku healthier. So I suppose I will simply carry on. A chuckle. Katsuki is blonde, by the way, just like I told you he would be. There's no way he wouldn't take after Mitsuki. I'm fairly certain the only thing he got from Masaru was a Y chromosome. A soft hum. And as wary as I am to let another loud blonde into my life, I suppose I can keep an eye out for him. Hopefully he and Izuku will get along, like you had always wanted them to. Until next time, love. Call ended. That night, Hizashi sat stiffly on the edge of his bed, the sheets partially drawn into his lap. The city lights twinkled outside the window like the stars above, and lights from the various monitors glinted off the plastic of Izuku's incubator. It was late. Izuku didn't have much of a circadian rhythm at this point, but he was still in a sleep now anyway. Hizashi watched the rhythmic dance of lines and numbers on Izuku's monitors, unable to see his son from this angle, especially hidden under blankets as he was. He swallowed hard. He didn't want to do this. He really, really didn't want to do this. Exhaustion tugged at his eyes and bones even after only one day of full wakefulness. Even with his stamina quirks, he knew he needed to sleep. He didn't want to get lectured on how important it was again. But he could not emphasize how much he did not want to go to sleep. Hizashi sighed, hunching over and placing his head in his hands. His stomach felt like he had just eaten something rancid from a dumpster, and not just protein bars from the nurse's station. His heart pounded like he was in the middle of a fight for his life, and not sitting at the edge of a hospital bed, mere meters away from his baby boy. His lungs kept catching, refusing to breathe smoothly. As much as he didn't want to admit it, he was scared. Terrified, actually. Terrified beyond what words could convey that, if he went to sleep of his own volition, something terrible would happen to Izuku while he slept. It was completely illogical, and made no sense whatsoever, yet he could not shake it. It hung over him like a noose, and placing his head on the pillow was as good as stepping up to the gallows and placing the rope around his neck himself. Hizashi dragged a hand down his face, looking back over at the incubator. As much as he wanted to give in and stay up again, he knew Sanuki-san was right. He really did need to sleep. Stamina quirks would not last him all of Izuku's life, or even his infancy. That wasn't even considering the agreement he was being forced into if he wanted to keep custody, which cut him off from stealing any quirks that may be helpful or interesting. He needed to take care of himself, or he would not be able to take care of Izuku. He absolutely refused to entertain the possibility of becoming like his own parents. He would do it right, or he wouldn't do it at all. Since he also refused to entertain the possibility of not being there for Izuku, that left one option: sleeping. Hizashi took a deep breath and forced himself to lie down. He didn't need to sleep for long. He could check on Izuku in a couple of hours. He doubted he would be able to sleep much more than that without the encouragement of sheer exhaustion. He just needed to get into the habit of sleeping every night again. He slammed his eyes shut and tried to focus on the sound of Izuku's monitors to lull him to sleep. The sky was beginning to brighten by the time he managed to actually fall asleep, but he managed. He didn't remember his dreams. All right, listeners, this concludes day 18 of All For You. I hope you all are still enjoying this one. Let me know your thoughts and reactions to everything so far. And as always, thank you so much for listening.